What was your Candle Cove? That piece of media you saw as a child that you spent years not even sure it was real. This is a bit obscure, but I swore for years that I saw the cycling road race on TV that went down the main road and up the small mountain behind where we live. I remembered feeling really excited that a sporting event was in my backyard, but I could never find any evidence that it ever happened. I convinced myself it was a dream. Then about 2 months ago our city announced this huge cycling event to happen in the city in a few years time, and they mentioned that they used to host a cycling event in the early 2000s. I looked it up out of curiosity and found out one of the stages went between two towns where the only route is to use the main road I mentioned, and that highlights of it aired on TV. I was absolutely stunned that it actually existed and wasn't a dream. Space cases. I had vague recollections of a series that involved kids on a spaceship who get to other sections by going down this slide that takes you to the room you want. The only episode I remembered was one where some fungus or something took up residence in the slides. I finally found the name during one night of nostalgic IMDb viewing and then found some uploaded episodes on YouTube. It's not as good as I remember. Starring a young Jewel State, she had an invisible friend. Then they wrote her out of the show by making the invisible friend real and her invisible. I stopped watching after that. Big Bad Beetleborgs. The only thing I remembered about it was the Halloween monsters from the awful American version of the show. But every time I searched that show I never saw them, so I kept looking up Halloween specials looking for this stupid show. On my freaking deathbed I will remember that Flabber promised to show the kids his tattoo to get them to do something. When they said meto it, he said it was on his spleen. Of all the freaking things to be haunted by. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz anime. I had some of the episodes on bootleg VHS from a neighbor in the 90s, but nobody else I knew watched it. As I got older I tried to find it to no avail, I assume because I didn't know it was an anime. In 2014 I rediscovered it on an anime site that I was using to watch DBZ and finally got to watch all the episodes with the full context. Thanks for pointing this one out. I'd actually never heard of it till now, but I've just watched a couple episodes and it's really quite cute and charming. Though if you can hook me up with wherever you may have watched it, that'd be great. I can only find 3 episodes on YouTube and none of the sites I watch anime on seem to have it. The Looney Tunes episode where everything is poorly drawn because it got replaced overnight and Bugs Bunny is the only one normal because he didn't eat the weird carrots. Such a bizarre episode that I thought I had dreamed it years ago. Nope, real. Not quite as creepy as I remembered it, but still weird AF. Apparently when I went looking for it on YouTube for the 100th time, the only upload of it was from a month ago. That's how I saw it was real. Sagwa, aka that Chinese cat show from PBS Kids. I thank the internet for assuring me I wasn't the only one who thought I hallucinated the dang show. It was rarely on. And I don't think it had very many episodes. I think I even remembered them having it then removing it from the PBS Kids website. It was a TV show, a cartoon, about 2 different warring colonies of insects. One was always shown very light, colorful, pinks, greens, blues. The other was browns, reds, a lot darker, very gritty and dirty. There was always a lot of heavy machinery mechanics shown in their world. The key plot of the show was a girl from the light insect colony and a boy from the dark insect colony were in love. I think the insects might have been ants, but I can't be sure. The animation was extremely good. Nobody in my life has ever heard anything vaguely like this show. My dad thinks he remembers it. My mother does not and thinks I imagined it. That sounds like Insectors to me. The Black Cauldron. I saw it in the theater when it came out and had the book with one of those plastic 45s that made noise when it was time to turn the page. From the time I was 10 and started talking about it to people, until I graduated from HS in 2000, it was non-existent. So non-existent that Disney told you it didn't exist if you tried to get it for a video store like Blockbuster. Not available but does not exist. And no one believed me for years. Until my buddy that worked for Blockbuster said he remembered it and learned that Disney was telling Blockbuster that it didn't exist when he tried to get it for his store. Finally in about 2000 if I recall correctly they re-released it on VHS. Then DVD and I was finally vindicated. Gurgi will take his Matthew Fukin crunchings and munchings. Man, Disney really tried to bury that movie. You'd think it was Song of the South levels, but really it's just super dark. A game called Zoombanus. It was a learning computer game that I played at school that I vaguely remembered, specifically the part where you make a pizza for some kind of monsters. It eluded me until last year when I stumbled across it again. That was the crap at our primary school. When I was little, I used to listen to a CD before bed about a little girl who was transported into a magical world with a flute and purple dragon. I couldn't remember much of the story, but knew it started with an orchestra warming up. Anytime I brought it up, no one had a clue what I was talking about. Eventually, I just thought it was a reoccurring dream. A few weeks ago, I was telling my husband about it, and after almost an hour of digging on the internet, I found it. It's called Mozart's Magic Fantasy. It's free on Spotify, YouTube, and Google. There was a whole series in that classical kids line of tapes. As a kid, I had Mozart's Magic Fantasy, Beethoven Lives Upstairs, and Mr. Bach Comes to Call. Not exactly obscure or recent, but it's a good story that fits here. When I was little, mid-90s, I would get up early to watch Power Rangers. Well, after Power Rangers there was this strange cartoon about a curiously strong monkey boy named Goku who had a magic extending staff and rode a flying cloud. And I remember going to school and telling my friends about it. Nobody had heard of this show and didn't believe me. After a while, that show was replaced with something else and I started to doubt it was even real. Must have been something I made up. Well, a few years later some of my friends were super excited about DBZ on Cartoon Network. Wouldn't shut up about it, and I swore I had been watching that show a long time ago, and they didn't believe me about it either. Once again I doubted my own memory. Maybe I made up a show in my head and it just seems real. Wasn't until many years later I realized the original Dragon Ball aired on Fox Kids in some markets for a while, but never really caught on, and anime as a whole was still pretty obscure. So not only was my mystery show real, it became extremely popular. I first saw One Piece on Fox Kids way back in the day. My dad had a game on his computer when I was very young. He played it a lot and I enjoyed watching, but it seemed too complicated for me to do. I remembered that it was a claymation type and you had to swing on some rings to open the door, and it had a weird icon. Years later I tried explaining it multiple times trying to figure out what it was, but dad had no idea what I was talking about. Of course now, dang near 15 years later, you can Google it. The Neverhood, aka Clayman, The Mystery of the Neverhood. All I needed to read was it was a claymation game to know you were referring to the Neverhood, but mentioning the rings to open the door puzzle cemented it. It makes me want to find my old CD and see if it will still work. One of the ones for me was the Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon. The one with the robot chicken and the green tank-like robot. I must have watched it when I was about 5 years old, maximum. I thought I dreamed it until I randomly found a clip from it in a YouTube compilation or something. That was the one that ran concurrently with a slightly more serious series. The cheap walk cycles from the Sponge Who Could Fly episode of SpongeBob. It was so surreal to me that it actually scared me for a bit. The 90s version of Land of the Lost. I saw bits of the 70s version on pay cable as a preteen and was super confused because I didn't remember the effects being that bad. I don't know why, but the 90s version always made me queasy when I watched it as a kid. Not because of the story, but just looking at this mess of special effects and low-res video. I never had quite the same reaction to any other TV series. There was a special on Adult Swim that aired one time in 2003 called Penguins Behind Bars. I was 6. I spent years online trying to find what it was. Finally, a couple years ago I found an archived promo website for the special and some commercials for it. My boyfriend ended up ordering me a copy of the original graphic novel. I actually emailed the author about where if I could find a copy of the special. Turns out it's only available for purchase in Canada. See? I remember Penguins Behind Bars. Maybe you can help me with my own lost show. It was on right after Penguins Behind Bars and was an anime about a robot who wanted to become a real human. All I remember about the episode was that a woman, I believe the love interest, shot herself in the head. It was a Garfield thing. I don't know if it was a cartoon or if it was a comic book or what, but Garfield and Odie and the Pink Cat were in space, and they were all wearing really buff looking mecha suits. Garfield got dissed by the Pink Cat and Odie stole his girl. Maybe it was a fan art? Cyborg 009. Old butt anime that I saw as a kid that no one around me seemed to remember. It drove me crazy until I finally found it online. There's a new version of Cyborg 009 on Netflix now, just as a random for your information. The theme song from The Last Unicorn. I remembered the movie vividly, but I'd recall small bits of the song here and there without any other context, and for years I could not remember where it came from. Finally I bought the movie for my kid and there it was. Had I remembered the part that said The Last Unicorn, I'd have obviously known where it came from, but I never got to that part. It was always some other tiny clip of it here and there. God, I love that book movie. I never had that same moment because I had a copy of the book, but I first saw the movie at 5 and didn't watch it again until I was 16 and could still remember huge portions of dialogue almost word for word. On another line for books, Tanith Lee's Black Unicorn. My dad still denies that he read it to me. The old Nick Jr. host character that was just a talking cartoon face on a colored background. This would have been early 2000s, but I've never heard mention or seen it since I was a little kid. Hi there, face here. A horror movie my dad used to watch in the early 90s. All I remember was it was about a pendulum that was huge. I ask him about it all the time, but he doesn't recall anything of the sort. A game where you have this floating island and have to build turrets and navigate around and stuff. I wasn't a super small child, but my hazy memory was convinced I made it up, and I chalked it up to a nice fantasy that I had and I'm kinda still looking for. Years later I found out that it was Project Nomad S, and an actual game. I was relieved, because I often enough think I'm going insane already. I remember that game. I couldn't remember its name. Thank you so much. That one show with the big yellow monster dude with purple spots. Can't remember the name for the life of me, but for a while I was convinced it was a fever dream. At some point a friend of mine knew what I was talking about, but sometimes I still question its existence. There was this PC game my brother borrowed from his friend when I was in high school. It was a first-person fantasy RPG where you could pick your race among a bunch of humans and a lizard person. Never got far. Just escaped the first dungeon before I got bored. It wasn't until many years later that I learned that it was the original Elder Scrolls game. Never could get into 1.4, but Skyrim sure as heck made me its B. Until you said it was Elder Scrolls, I was 100% certain you were talking about Eye of the Beholder. We sing silly songs. The only thing I remembered about the show was that there was two kids, a boy and a girl, that had a beagle with a rainbow bone that could transport them to another land. Spent actual years trying to Google this and magically found it in a Reddit thread last year. Oh my frick, I thought this legit was a fever dream. I was sick a lot as a child, and me being deaf, only 50% minus 60% hearing loss at the time. Now I'm at 80%. A music style video really didn't make any sense. Does anyone remember the cartoon for Redwall? None of my friends had seen it as a kid and I'd ended up forgetting about it completely. Then as I got older I learned that it was a book. I'd have to say that. And Jane and the Dragon. A friend posted on social media asking if anyone remembered it, and I kind of screamed internally. I watched Redwall as a kid. It was only on Sunday mornings, so if we went to the earlier session of church I cowed and watch it. From what I remember it followed the plot of the books pretty closely. In 1997-ish, I read an article in GQ about a movie titled God, directed by Steven Spielberg, and starring Brad Pitt as God, Elizabeth Shue as his love interest, and Tom Hanks as the devil. The article was a full-on feature story, describing the plot. God takes human form, falls in love, and eventually gets sentenced to death by lethal injection. Filming location stories, had a tagline and poster, everything. For years after, I wondered why the movie was never released. As the article mentioned, it was one of the most expensive productions of all time, and the cast pedigree seemed like a no-brainer. And for years, I also couldn't find a single thing about the movie or the article itself online. After a while, I started wondering if I actually dreamed the whole thing up. About a year ago I googled it, however, and found the article. It was, in fact, real, but the movie was not. The feature was actually a tongue-in-cheek faux article making fun of the Hollywood machine. They never once mentioned this in the actual article, though, so I imagine I wasn't the only one confused. Anyway, that's mine. When I was little, like before I was in preschool, my mom used to drop me off at a babysitter's place. I remember hating it and I would just cry the whole time that I wanted to go home. However, at the same time every day I would start to behave just so she would let me watch TV. There was one show in particular that I liked, but for the life of me I can't figure out what it was. All I remember is that I only ever watched it there, and it was some colorful action cartoon and I'm like 98% sure it was in that early anime style. The problem is that this all happened in like 1993-94, and at the time pretty much the only anime you could see on TV was Dragon Ball and Sailor Moon. I'm positive it wasn't Dragon Ball, and recently my wife introduced me to Sailor Moon and I was hit with a flood of nostalgia. I can't explain it, but everything about it felt so familiar. I figured that had to have been what I watched at the babysitter's house, but then I learned that Sailor Moon didn't air in America until 1995, so the timeline doesn't match up. This has been bugging me for years. I can't really ask anybody about it because I remember so little. There's really no clues I can give to help narrow it down beyond apparently a lot like Sailor Moon, but 2 years before America ever heard of it. If anybody else knows, please God help me. Otherwise I'll have to write a Candle Cove type story just to give myself closure. In maybe 5th grade I had a sleepover and we watched a YouTube video that was these horrific looking claymation demons. It might have been called something like Creepy Children's Show banned from television. Update. I found it and it's definitely real and I hate it. It's from a movie called The Adventures of Mark Twain, which is actually really awesome. It was on Netflix at some point if you want to try and give it a watch. One of my favorite films. The Halloween special they had way back in Adult Swim with Brak. I remember they ended the special with Brak's dad's head swallowed by some worm monster. I feel like I'm been going crazy over the years trying to look for those clips. Anybody wanna help? God bless Brak. Space Ghost Musical Barbecue was one of the best CDs I ever owned. A live action show on BBC, I think. The premise was that this group of kids had to save the world by getting a unicorn to sing. The bad guys were an old knight and what is best described as a gimp who made dog noises and walked around crouching. I think he could smell blood. They came from another dimension, I think. In the last episode the lead kid stabs the unicorn, killing it as he realized it only sings when it's dying. This does exist because I found the name of it once but I cannot remember for the life of me. The game Cats 2 for the Wii PS2. I spent ages googling stuff from my hazy childhood memories to find out what it was. I'm still not entirely convinced it's real, even after looking it up. The basic plot premise is that you are a cat who needs to steal a magic hat back from a vault that's trying to summon a dragon, and I think the hat talks to you or something like that. The reason why this is so weird is that every other Pets branded game is a virtual pet simulator. As far as I know, Dogs Cats 2 specifically for the Wii PS2, the PCGBADS versions, which are branded exactly the same way, are regular virtual pet games, is the only game in the series that has an actual plot. Yep, that nightmare is real. Ubisoft buying out or obtaining PF Magic was a mistake. Those Pets games on PC were my life as a kid and it killed me when the reboots were so vastly different and weird. A scene where a couple were having sex and were filmed unknowing. The tape was projected onto the side of a building for the neighborhood to watch. Reddit helped me find it. It was from Problem Child 2. I have one of these. It was some cartoon that was about these ant-like creatures. Or, they were at least segmented bug creatures. Anyway, most of them had 3 segments, and the main character didn't. I think it was related to growing up, like you got your last segment when you were an adult, but ones younger than him were getting it, and he just never did. Anyway, he found some kind of sentient segment that would hang out with him, and when it ran away, he'd have to hide like behind leaves and make excuses if anyone saw him, because he didn't want to admit he wasn't grown up, while trying to find the thing and convince it to behave. You have no idea how hard it is to find some old cartoon about an ant with a magic butt. Seriously starting to think I just made it up. Update. Making this comment got me to go looking once more, and I found it. It was called Gallivants. There was a movie where these people were trapped at a truck stop. All the trucks were alive and trying to kill them. I think in one scene the toaster in the truck stop was even trying to kill them. I have asked friends and family and no one knows WTF I am on about. Maximum Overdrive. Stephen King at his most coked out. A second one, the series CBS Storybrooke, which dramatized children's novels into 30-minute animated shorts, and sent me off to find several of my favorite books: Joan Caris's Witch Cat, Jane Yolen's Dragon's Blood, Claire Bell's Ra's Creature, but for years and years I couldn't even find the series name. Then there was a second moment because I remembered it having been hosted by a black man. The original airing was hosted by Captain Kangaroo, but when I saw it, in second run in the 90s, it was hosted by Theo from The Cosby Show. I saw one of those head on, apply directly to the forehead commercials, but instead of the stick, the person was rubbing a shoe against their forehead. Yeah, I remember those commercials too. They were for Zoo York, a brand of skateboards and sneakers and such. A movie called Samson and Sally. It was about whales hiding from men. Very dark and an eerie soundtrack. I only had remembered bits and pieces. I had watched it when I was 4 but was able to finally find it online. There was a show that used to be on Fox right after the Power Rangers. It was medieval themed. Everyone at my school loved the Power Rangers, but when I would talk about the medieval show that literally aired right after, nobody would know what I was talking about. I've never been able to find it. As a teenager in the 90s, I saw a documentary about a competition between 3 aspiring models. It included a round where they each kneeled on a turntable huddled under a towel and we were told they were naked under the towel. I remember this clearly because I found it extremely hot at the time, but in hindsight, WTF. When I was younger I was zapping through the channels and found some movie where the male protagonist saves some woman on an Arctic research station from hypothermia by sleeping with her. This was already disturbing, but zapping on and later returning to the movie it was revealed that he caught some sort of disease from having a protected sex with a woman, revealed through him pee blood in a urinal. I also remember him being tied up to a chair later on. I still don't know what movie that was, but it has left some weird impression on me that I can't forget it. Doubt anybody knows what I'm talking about, so I'll probably never find out what it was. Mine is a short horror story. In it, a hunter tracking a deer accidentally falls into a huge underground cave chamber with no exits. He spends the night exploring the chamber, which is knee-deep in old animal corpses. He encounters a pack of starving wolves, who are too weak to fight him, and a huge snake that spends the night trying to climb the walls to no avail. He eventually gives up hope and spends the rest of the night contemplating. The next morning his friends track him down and rescue him, and he, having had some deep revelations about his shared existence with all creation, insists on going back down and rescuing the wolves and snake. It might be called Gruesome Night, but it was in a short story anthology I got from the library, so the book title and other details are long gone for me. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.